Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at attention in the briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The fluorescent lights hummed above as Commander Jack Brennan studied the satellite photos spread across the table. Outside, the Pacific Ocean crashed against the shore, but inside, tension filled the air like smoke. 3 American contractors, Brennan said, his voice flat and tired. Taken 6 days ago from a construction site in Somalia. Intel says they're being held in a compound 20 miles inland from Mogadishu. Sarah leaned forward, studying the images. She had spent 8 years in Navy intelligence before transferring to Special Operations Liaison. She knew this region better than anyone in the room. She had lived there for 2 years under diplomatic cover, spoke fluent Somali, and had built a network of local contacts that the CIA still used. "That's Bashir Hassan's territory," she said quietly. "I know that compound. I was stationed there in 2019 when I worked with the embassy." Brennan looked up, his gray eyes sharp. "You were intelligence, Chen. This is a combat extraction, different world." The other operators around the table shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Mike Torres, a SEAL team leader, cleared his throat. "Sir, if Lieutenant Chen has ground knowledge—" "She has desk knowledge," Brennan interrupted. "No offense, Chen, but knowing a place from satellite photos and cocktail parties isn't the same as breaching it under fire." Sarah felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "Commander, I wasn't at cocktail parties. I was recruiting assets, running sources, and meeting with warlords in back alleys. I know the layout of that compound, the guard rotations, and the tribal dynamics that control that area." Brennan set down the photos and crossed his arms. "The answer is no. We're sending in Team 6 at 0300 tomorrow. Air insertion, fast rope entry, extract the hostages, and exfil by helicopter. Clean and simple." "That won't work," Sarah said, her voice firmer now. "Hassan has anti-aircraft weapons positioned on every roof within a mile of that compound. The local militia told me about them 2 years ago. They shot down a UN helicopter in 2020. You send choppers in there and they'll light up the sky before you even get close." Brennan's jaw tightened. "Our intel doesn't show any AA weapons." "Your intel is wrong," Sarah said. "Hassan moves them constantly. They're hidden under tarps and in false rooms, but they're there, Commander. I've seen them." Torres looked between them. "Sir, if there's even a chance—" "There's always a chance," Brennan snapped. "That's war, but I'm not going to compromise an entire operation based on 2-year-old intelligence from someone who's never been in combat." He turned to Sarah, his expression hard. "You did good work in intelligence, Lieutenant, but this is not your world. You're not a door kicker, you're not a shooter, and you're certainly not going behind enemy lines." The words hit Sarah like a slap. She had trained alongside these men for 6 months since her transfer. She had qualified expert on every weapon system. She had passed the physical fitness tests, the combat swimming, the survival courses. But in Brennan's eyes, she could see the truth. He didn't see a soldier. He saw a liability. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Sarah asked. Brennan sighed. "Go ahead." "Those 3 contractors have families. They have wives and children waiting for them in Texas. If you send helicopters into that compound, Hassan will hear you coming from 5 miles away. He'll execute the hostages and disappear into the countryside before your team even touches the ground. But if someone who knows the area, who speaks the language, who understands the culture could get close quietly—" She paused. "There's another way." "There's no other way," Brennan said. "The decision is made. Team 6 goes in tomorrow night. You're dismissed, Lieutenant." Sarah felt the eyes of every operator in the room on her. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable. Torres gave her a small nod, but it didn't help. She had been shut down, dismissed, and made to look foolish in front of the people she worked with every day. She saluted sharply. "Yes, sir." As she walked out of the briefing room, she heard whispers behind her. "Poor Chen, she tried. Brennan's right, though. This isn't an analyst's job. She doesn't understand how these things work." Sarah walked across the base, past the training grounds where young SEALs were running obstacle courses in the afternoon heat. She had run those same courses. She had proven herself over and over, but it was never enough. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her father, a retired Marine colonel who had raised her alone after her mother died when Sarah was 7. "How's my warrior doing?" the message read. Sarah smiled sadly. Her father had always believed in her, even when nobody else did. He had taught her to shoot when she was 10, to fight when she was 12, to never back down when she was 15. Stand up for what's right, he always said. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She texted back, fighting the good fight, Dad, love you. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment off base, staring at the ceiling, thinking about those three contractors. She had read their files. Mark Peterson, 42, father of three from Houston. David Kim, 37, newlywed from San Antonio. James Rodriguez, 51, grandfather of five from Dallas. They had gone to Somalia to build a school. Now they were going to die because Commander Brennan was too stubborn to listen. At midnight, Sarah made a decision. She got up, opened her laptop, and pulled up everything she had on Bashir Hassan's compound. She studied the maps, the photos, the intelligence reports she had written years ago. She knew that compound like she knew her own apartment. She knew where the guards smoked cigarettes at 2 in the morning. She knew which wall had loose stones that could be climbed. She knew where Hassan kept his prisoners in the basement, in a reinforced room that had once been a storage cellar. She also knew something else. She still had contacts in Somalia, people who owed her favors, people who could help. Sarah picked up her secure phone and made a call. It rang 4 times before a man answered in Somali. Aisha, the man said, using her cover name from her intelligence days. Is that you? Hello, Omar, Sarah said softly in perfect Somali. I need your help. Omar Yusuf had been Sarah's best source when she worked in Somalia. He was a businessman in Mogadishu who walked the line between the government and the warlords, trading information to both sides while somehow staying alive. Sarah had saved his nephew from a false arrest 3 years ago, and Omar never forgot debts. What do you need, my friend? Omar asked, his voice cautious but warm. Sarah explained the situation quickly, the hostages, the compound, the planned rescue that would fail. I need to get into that compound quietly. No helicopters, no teams, just me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Aisha, you are talking about suicide. Hassan is not a forgiving man if he catches you. He won't catch me, Sarah said. Can you get me into the country, get me close to the compound? Another pause. There is a cargo plane that flies medical supplies from Djibouti to Mogadishu tomorrow afternoon. I can arrange for you to be on it, and I can have a car waiting for you. But after that, you are on your own. I cannot risk my family by helping you further. That's all I need, Sarah said. Thank you, Omar. You are either very brave or very foolish, Omar said softly. I think perhaps both. Be careful, Aisha, come back alive. Sarah hung up and sat in the darkness of her apartment. What she was about to do was against every regulation, every chain of command, every rule she had ever followed. If she succeeded, they might court-martial her. If she failed, she would die alone in a foreign country, and Commander Brennan would be proven right. But those 3 men didn't have time for regulations. They needed someone to act. At 0500, Sarah packed a small backpack with essentials, dark clothes, a combat knife, a false passport she had kept from her intelligence days, and $5,000 in cash. She dressed in civilian clothes and drove to San Diego International Airport. She had already booked a commercial flight to Djibouti using her personal credit card. There would be a record, but she didn't care anymore. Before she left, she wrote a letter on her laptop and scheduled it to send to Commander Brennan at noon the next day, after she was already in Somalia. The letter was simple. Commander Brennan, by the time you read this, I will be in Somalia attempting to rescue the hostages. I cannot stand by and watch good men die when I know there is another way. If I succeed, you can punish me however you see fit. If I fail, tell my father I died doing what I believed was right. Lieutenant Sarah Chen. The flight to Djibouti took 26 hours with layovers. Sarah slept in short bursts, her mind running through everything she remembered about the compound. She visualized every corner, every hallway, every possible escape route. This was what her intelligence training had prepared her for, planning, analyzing, thinking 3 steps ahead. When she landed in Djibouti, the heat hit her like a wall. The small airport was crowded with aid workers, military contractors, and journalists. Sarah blended in easily, just another Westerner in khaki pants and a sun hat. Omar's contact met her outside the airport, a thin man with worried eyes who said nothing, just handed her a phone and walked away. The phone buzzed immediately with a text. Cargo plane departs at 1600. Hangar 7. Tell them you are Dr. Sarah Martin, volunteer physician. Sarah found the hangar and presented her false passport to a tired-looking pilot. He barely glanced at it. You picked a hell of a time to volunteer, Doc, he said. Things are hot in Mogadishu right now. When aren't they? Sarah replied with a small smile. The flight took 90 minutes. Sarah sat in the back of the cargo plane surrounded by boxes of medical supplies, antibiotics, and bandages. She thought about her father, probably finishing his morning coffee at his ranch in Montana, completely unaware that his daughter was flying into a war zone alone. She thought about Commander Brennan and the other operators, probably doing final equipment checks for their midnight raid. They would be loading helicopters, checking weapons, going over maps, and they would walk into a trap. When the plane landed in Mogadishu, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red. Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped onto the tarmac. The air smelled like dust, diesel fuel, and the ocean. It was a smell she remembered well. Another contact met her with a battered Toyota truck. He drove her through the chaotic streets of Mogadishu without speaking. The city had changed since she was last here. More buildings, more people, more guns. Militia fighters stood on corners, watching traffic with suspicious eyes. They stopped at a safe house in a quiet neighborhood. The contact handed her a small bag and left without a word. Inside the bag, Sarah found dark clothing, a local scarf for covering her face, a detailed hand-drawn map of Hassan's compound, and a small pistol with 2 magazines. There was also a note in Omar's handwriting. The guards change at 200. The north wall is weakest. May God protect you. Sarah checked her watch. It was 1900 hours, 7 at night. She had 7 hours to prepare. She changed into the dark clothes, tested the pistol, and studied the map until she had it memorized. Then she sat in the darkness and did what soldiers have done before battle since the beginning of time. She waited. At midnight, Sarah heard the first sounds of helicopters in the distance. Her heart sank. Brennan's team was starting their approach. She had hoped to reach the hostages first, but now it was a race. She grabbed her small pack and slipped out of the safe house. The streets were quiet, lit only by scattered streetlights and cooking fires. Sarah moved like a shadow, keeping to the darkest paths, using every skill she had learned in a decade of intelligence work. The compound was 2 miles away. Sarah ran, her boots silent on the dusty roads. She could hear the helicopters getting louder now. The entire city would be awake soon. Sarah reached the compound at 01:30, breathing hard but focused. The building loomed in front of her, a 3-story concrete structure surrounded by a high wall. Just as Omar had promised, guards stood at the front gate, smoking cigarettes and talking in low voices. The sound of helicopters was getting closer. Sarah could see searchlights in the sky to the north. Brennan's team was 10 minutes out, maybe less. She circled to the north wall, staying in the shadows. The wall was 12 feet high, made of crumbling concrete blocks. Sarah found the weak spot Omar had mentioned, a section where the mortar had deteriorated. She pulled off her backpack, took out a thin climbing rope, and scaled the wall in 30 seconds. She dropped silently into a narrow courtyard. Ahead of her, she could see the main building. Lights glowed in the upper windows. Guards patrolled the roof. This was Hassan's fortress, and she was deep inside it, alone. Sarah moved along the wall of the courtyard, staying low. She could hear voices from inside the building, men arguing in Somali about the helicopter sounds. They knew something was happening. They were getting ready. She reached a side door that led to the basement, exactly where her old intelligence reports said the prisoners were kept. The door was locked, but it was an old lock. Sarah pulled out a small pick set she had hidden in her boot and worked quickly. The lock clicked open in 15 seconds. The basement stairs were dark and narrow. Sarah descended slowly, her pistol drawn, her heart hammering. At the bottom, a single guard sat in a chair outside a reinforced metal door. He was young, maybe 20, with an AK-47 across his lap. He looked bored and tired. Sarah couldn't shoot him. The sound would alert everyone. Instead, she moved like smoke down the stairs. When she was 3 feet away, the guard finally sensed something and looked up. His eyes went wide. Sarah struck him in the throat with the edge of her hand, a move her father had taught her when she was 16. The guard gasped and fell forward. Sarah caught him, lowered him to the floor, and checked his pulse. He was unconscious but alive. She dragged him into the shadows and took his keys. Her hands shook as she unlocked the metal door. This was it. This was why she had risked everything. The door swung open to reveal 3 men chained to the wall of a dank cellar. They looked up at her with hollow, terrified eyes. Mark Peterson, David Kim, James Rodriguez, all alive but beaten and exhausted. "Who are you?" Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. "U.S. Navy. Sarah said quickly, kneeling to work on their chains with the guards' keys. "We're getting you out of here. Stay quiet and follow me exactly." "There's a whole team coming?" David asked, hope flooding his face. "Something like that," Sarah said. The chains fell away. "Can you all walk?" "We can run if we have to," James said, standing shakily. Outside, the sound of helicopters suddenly grew deafening. Sarah heard shouts from above, then the sharp crack of gunfire. Brennan's team was engaging. The entire compound erupted in chaos. "Go," Sarah shouted. "Backstairs now." She led the three men up the narrow staircase. When they reached the courtyard, hell had broken loose. Tracer rounds lit up the night sky. Hassan's men were firing Russian-made anti-aircraft guns from the rooftops, exactly as Sarah had warned. She could see two helicopters circling, unable to get close, taking heavy fire. "This way," Sarah pulled the men toward the north wall. But as they ran across the courtyard, a door burst open and 5 of Hassan's fighters poured out, weapons raised. Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired 3 shots, dropping the first man. The others scattered, returning fire. Bullets chipped the concrete wall beside her head. "Climb," she screamed at the hostages. Mark, David, and James scrambled up the damaged section of wall. Sarah covered them, firing controlled bursts, making every shot count. She had 14 rounds left. 12, 10. A bullet grazed her left shoulder. Pain exploded through her arm, but she kept firing. 8 rounds, 6. James cleared the wall, then David. Mark was halfway up when a bullet struck the concrete next to his hand. He slipped, fell, and Sarah caught him. "Go!" she shouted, practically throwing him at the wall. More fighters were coming. Sarah could hear boots pounding across the courtyard. She fired her last 4 rounds, giving the hostages time to clear the wall. Then her pistol clicked empty. Sarah turned and leaped at the wall, her fingers finding cracks in the concrete. Pain screamed through her wounded shoulder as she pulled herself up. Bullets sparked off the stone around her. She threw herself over the top and fell hard on the other side, landing in the dirt of the alley. "Run," she gasped. The 4 of them sprinted through the dark streets of Mogadishu. Behind them, the compound was ablaze with gunfire. The helicopters were pulling back, Hassan's anti-aircraft fire too heavy to risk an insertion. Sarah had been right. The raid would have failed. But now, bleeding and running through enemy territory with 3 exhausted hostages, she faced a new problem: how to get them out alive. Sarah led the 3 men through the maze of dark alleys, her wounded shoulder screaming with every movement. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire continued as Hassan's men shot at Brennan's retreating helicopters. The SEALs had been forced to abort the mission, exactly as Sarah had predicted. "Where are we going?" Mark gasped, stumbling over broken concrete. "Safe house," Sarah said through gritted teeth. 2 more blocks." But when they rounded the next corner, Sarah's heart sank. 3 militia fighters stood in the alley ahead, weapons raised. They had been cut off. Sarah pushed the hostages back against the wall. "Stay behind me," she said quietly. Her pistol was empty. She had a knife, but against 3 armed men, the odds were impossible. The fighters approached slowly, grinning. They said something in Somali, crude words about finding an American woman in their streets. Sarah responded in perfect Somali, her voice cold and steady. "I am a U.S. Navy officer. These men are under my protection. Let us pass, and no one else has to die tonight." The lead fighter laughed. He raised his AK-47, pointing it at Sarah's chest. "You die first, American woman. Then we take these men back to Hassan for a reward." Sarah tensed, preparing to charge. She would die, but maybe the distraction would give the hostages a chance to run. It was a bad plan, but it was the only plan. Then a voice called out from the darkness in Somali, "Put down your weapons, now." Omar Yusuf stepped into the alley, flanked by 4 men carrying rifles. Sarah had never been happier to see anyone in her life. The 3 militia fighters looked uncertain. They recognized Omar. Everyone in this part of Mogadishu knew him. He was connected, powerful, and dangerous to cross. "These people are under my protection," Omar said calmly. "Hassan is not the only one with power in this city. You can take these Americans back to him and collect your reward, but then you will answer to me, and my reach is longer than Hassan's." The fighters hesitated. The lead one looked at Sarah, then at Omar, calculating odds. Finally, he lowered his weapon. "This is not over," he muttered. "It is for tonight," Omar said. "Go." The 3 men backed away and disappeared into the darkness. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "You are bleeding," Omar said, looking at her shoulder. "I'll live," Sarah said. "Thank you. You said you couldn't help beyond getting me into the country." Omar smiled sadly. "I lied. You are my friend, Aisha. I could not let you die in my city." He gestured to his men. "Come, I have a boat waiting at the harbor. It will take you to a U.S. Navy ship offshore, but we must move quickly. Hassan will be hunting for you." They reached the harbor 20 minutes later. The waterfront was dark and quiet, just fishing boats and cargo vessels rocking in the gentle waves. Omar led them to a small speedboat. His men stood guard while Sarah and the hostages climbed aboard. "I can never repay you," Sarah said to Omar. "You already did," Omar replied. "When you saved my nephew, this is how honor works, my friend. We protect those who protect us." He paused. "You were brave to come here alone, foolish but brave. The world needs more people who are willing to be foolish for the right reasons." The boat pulled away from the dock, cutting through the dark water. Sarah looked back at the lights of Mogadishu, at Omar standing on the pier, growing smaller in the distance. She wondered if she would ever see him again. The ride took 40 minutes. Sarah used the time to bandage her shoulder with supplies from the boat's first aid kit. The bullet had only grazed her, painful but not serious. She had been lucky. Mark, David, and James sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything that had happened. Finally, Mark spoke. "Who are you really? Why did you come alone?" Sarah looked at the three men, exhausted, beaten, but alive. "Someone had to," she said simply, "and I was the only one who knew how." "You saved our lives," James said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Those helicopters would have gotten us killed. Hassan's men were already loading weapons to execute us when we heard the choppers coming, but then you showed up." "I'm just glad I got there in time," Sarah said. Ahead, the dark shape of a U.S. Navy destroyer appeared. The USS Michael Murphy, a guided missile destroyer on anti-piracy patrol. The speedboat pulled alongside, and Navy sailors lowered a ladder. As Sarah climbed aboard, supporting her wounded shoulder, she was met by a young officer who saluted sharply. "Lieutenant Chen, we received word you were coming. Medical is standing by, and there's someone who wants to speak with you immediately." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Commander Brennan." "Yes, ma'am, he's on video link from Coronado. He's not happy." Sarah helped the three hostages aboard, making sure they were taken to medical first. Then she limped to the communications room, her wet clothes dripping water on the deck. The screen showed Commander Brennan's face, and he looked like he wanted to reach through the camera and strangle her. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Would you care to explain why you went rogue, violated direct orders, crossed international borders without authorization, and conducted an unauthorized military operation in a foreign country?" Sarah stood at attention, wincing from her shoulder. "I rescued 3 American hostages, sir." "You could have been killed. You could have caused an international incident. You could have compromised the entire operation." "The operation was already compromised, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Your helicopters were driven off by anti-aircraft fire exactly as I warned. If I hadn't been there, those 3 men would be dead right now. Mark Peterson, David Kim, and James Rodriguez are alive and safe because someone was willing to listen to intelligence instead of ego." Brennan's face turned red. "You are facing a court-martial, Lieutenant. Article 92, failure to obey orders. Article 86, absent without leave. Do you understand the severity of what you've done?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said, "and I'd do it again." The USS Michael Murphy steamed back to U.S. waters over the next 5 days. Sarah spent the time recovering from her shoulder wound, giving detailed debriefs to military intelligence, and waiting for the inevitable consequences of her actions. The 3 rescued hostages told anyone who would listen about the woman who had come alone into Hassan's compound and saved their lives. Mark Peterson called his wife in Houston and wept on the phone, telling her about the Navy lieutenant who had defied orders to bring him home. James Rodriguez wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy describing Sarah's courage. David Kim contacted every news outlet he could find. But Sarah knew it wouldn't matter. She had violated direct orders. She had gone rogue. In the military, the chain of command was sacred, and she had shattered it. When the ship docked at Naval Base San Diego, Sarah was met by 2 Marine guards who escorted her directly to a hearing room at Naval Special Warfare Command. Commander Brennan was there, along with Captain Elizabeth Warren, the commanding officer of NSW, and a Navy lawyer. Sarah stood at attention, her wounded shoulder stiff under her uniform. Captain Warren studied her for a long moment. She was a legend in the Navy, one of the first women to command a special operations unit, a veteran of 3 wars and known for being absolutely no-nonsense. "Lieutenant Chen," Warren said, "do you understand that what you did was completely outside the bounds of military discipline?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said. "Do you understand that we cannot allow officers to simply ignore orders and conduct their own operations whenever they disagree with their commanders?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Sarah took a breath. "Ma'am, I took an oath to protect American lives. Those 3 contractors were going to die if someone didn't act. I had intelligence that Commander Brennan's operation would fail, and I was right. The helicopters were driven off before they could even reach the compound. If I had followed orders, we would be planning 3 funerals right now instead of 3 homecomings." Brennan started to speak, but Warren held up her hand. "I've read all the reports, Commander. Lieutenant Chen's assessment of the anti-aircraft threat was accurate. Your operation did fail, and 3 American citizens are alive because someone had the ground intelligence to extract them safely." "With all due respect, Captain," Brennan said, his jaw tight, "if we allow officers to go rogue every time they think they know better—" "She didn't think she knew better, Commander," Warren interrupted. "She did know better, and you refused to listen." Warren turned back to Sarah. "However, Lieutenant Chen, the rules exist for a reason. We cannot have operators conducting unsanctioned missions in foreign countries. The international implications alone could have been catastrophic." "I understand, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. Warren opened a folder on the table. "The families of the rescued hostages have written letters on your behalf. So has Congressman Michael Torres. Yes, the brother of Lieutenant Mike Torres, who represents the district where Mark Peterson lives. The story has hit national news. You're being called a hero." "I'm not a hero, ma'am," Sarah said. "I'm just a soldier who did what needed to be done." Warren smiled slightly. "That's exactly what a hero would say." She closed the folder. "Here's the situation, Lieutenant. Legally, we could court-martial you. You violated multiple articles of military justice. However, 3 American families have their loved ones back because of your actions. The political cost of punishing you would be significant." Sarah waited, barely breathing. "Here's my decision," Warren said. "You will receive a formal letter of reprimand in your service record for disobeying direct orders and conducting unauthorized operations. This will likely end any chance of future promotion beyond your current rank." Sarah nodded, accepting the blow. "However," Warren continued, "you will also receive the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. You will be assigned as a senior intelligence liaison to SEAL Team 3, where your expertise will be properly utilized. And Commander Brennan will be required to complete additional training on integrating intelligence assets into operational planning." Brennan's face showed surprise and frustration, but he remained silent. Warren stood. "Lieutenant Chen, you put me in an impossible position. What you did was wrong by every standard of military discipline, but it was also brave, effective, and morally right. You saved 3 lives at great risk to your own. The Navy needs more officers with your courage and your intelligence knowledge, but we also need officers who work within the system." "I understand, ma'am," Sarah said. "Thank you." Warren's expression softened slightly. "Dismissed, Lieutenant. Go see your father. I understand he's been calling the Navy every day since you disappeared. He must be worried sick." 3 weeks later, Sarah stood on the stage at Naval Special Warfare Command in her dress uniform. Her father sat in the front row, his chest covered with his own medals from 30 years as a Marine. He was crying quietly, his face filled with pride. Captain Warren pinned the Navy Cross on Sarah's chest, a bronze cross with an eagle, one of the highest decorations the Navy could give. Mark Peterson, David Kim, and James Rodriguez sat with their families, watching the ceremony with tears in their eyes. After the ceremony, Mark approached Sarah. He was holding his youngest daughter, a 5-year-old girl with pigtails. "Lieutenant Chen, this is Emma. I want her to know the woman who made sure her daddy came home." Emma looked at Sarah with wide eyes. "Are you a superhero?" she asked. Sarah knelt down, smiling. "No, sweetheart, I'm just someone who doesn't give up when things get hard." "That sounds like a superhero to me," Emma said seriously. Later that evening, Sarah sat with her father at a quiet restaurant overlooking the ocean. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the Pacific. "Your mother would have been so proud," her father said finally. "You know, she was a nurse in the army. She believed in helping people no matter what the rules said. You're just like her." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I thought they were going to end my career, Dad." "Would that have stopped you from doing what you did?" he asked. Sarah thought about it. No, those men needed help. Someone had to go. Her father smiled. "Then you made the right choice. A career is just a job, Sarah, but character, doing what's right when it costs you something, that's what defines who you are." The next morning, Sarah reported to her new assignment with SEAL Team 3. Lieutenant Mike Torres met her at the team room. He extended his hand with a genuine smile. "Welcome to the team, Lieutenant Chen," he said. "We've been waiting for someone with real ground intelligence experience. No more desk jockeys who don't understand the field." Sarah shook his hand. "Thank you, Lieutenant." Torres lowered his voice. "Between you and me, what you did in Somalia, that took guts. Half the guys here couldn't believe you went in alone. They're calling you the ghost of Mogadishu." Sarah laughed. "I'd prefer they just call me by my name." "Too late," Torres said with a grin. "You're a legend now. You'll have to learn to live with it." As Sarah walked into the team room, the other operators stopped what they were doing and looked up. For a moment, there was silence. Then one of them started clapping. Another joined in. Soon, the entire room was applauding. Sarah felt her face flush. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. But as she looked around at these warriors, men who understood sacrifice, courage, and the cost of doing what was right, she realized something. She had finally earned their respect. Not because she had proven she could keep up with them, but because she had proven she was willing to stand alone for what she believed in. Commander Brennan appeared in the doorway. The room fell silent. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before: respect, maybe even admiration. "Lieutenant Chen," he said formally, "welcome to the team. We have a briefing in 10 minutes. Your expertise on East African operations will be essential to planning." He paused. "From now on, when you tell us intelligence matters, we listen. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. As Brennan walked away, Torres leaned close to Sarah and whispered, "That's the closest thing to an apology you'll ever get from him. Take it as a win." That night, Sarah video-called the 3 men she had rescued. They had formed a group chat and insisted on staying in touch. Mark was back with his family in Houston. David was planning his postponed honeymoon. James was teaching his grandchildren to play baseball. "How's the hero business treating you?" James joked. "Exhausting," Sarah admitted, "but good, really good." "We owe you our lives," Mark said seriously. "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call us. We're family now." "That's right," David added. "You didn't just save 3 contractors. You saved 3 fathers, 3 husbands, 3 sons. You gave our families their whole worlds back." After the call ended, Sarah sat in her small apartment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. She had been insulted, dismissed, and underestimated. She had risked everything, her career, her life, her freedom, on one decision. And she had been right. Sarah thought about all the people throughout her life who had doubted her. The instructors who said she wasn't strong enough. The officers who said she wasn't tough enough. The commanders who said she didn't belong in special operations. She had proven them all wrong, not by arguing, not by complaining, but by simply doing the job better than anyone thought possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it, warrior. Your mom is smiling down from heaven tonight. Sleep well. You've earned it." Sarah smiled and texted back, "Love you, Dad. Thanks for teaching me to never back down." As she turned off the lights and lay down to sleep, Sarah thought about Emma, the 5-year-old girl who had asked if she was a superhero. Maybe she wasn't a superhero, but she was something just as important. She was a woman who had stood up when it mattered, who had trusted her instincts, and who had refused to let doubt or fear or the judgments of others stop her from doing what was right. And in the end, that was the only thing that really mattered. The next morning, Sarah reported to SEAL Team 3 for her first operational briefing. She walked in with her head high, her shoulders still healing but her spirit stronger than ever. The ghost of Mogadishu was ready for whatever came next.